Inspector Gadget, doo-doo-doo. Inspector Gadget, doo-doo-doo. Inspector Gadget.
I cannot, ew. I can feel those bad vibes coming from you. Your energy, she's dark, she's nasty. I don't want her, ew.
No! God, please, no! No!
Welcome back to Torn Apart. Today we're talking about Quentin Dupieux and his filmography, mostly because his new film, it's come out today in France and it's called Smoking Causes Laughing, or in French, Fumer fait tousser.
On s'appelle les tabac force, mais en réalité il faut que tu saches, on est tous contre la cigarette. Fumer c'est nul, ça fait tousser.
I really love his filmography. He has a bit of a hybrid filmography because he's made films in French and in English. Kind of reminds me of Alexandre Aja, but quality-wise, it's definitely a lot better when it comes to his work. I decided to make this video in English mostly because I haven't seen any retrospective on his career on the English YouTube film environment, while there are a lot of videos made in French already about this director, because it is definitely one of the most interesting and also non-pretentious filmmakers here in France working today.
Toute ma jeunesse, j'étais ça en fait. Je le suis encore, d'ailleurs je suis complètement un amateur. Quand je me retrouve à filmer des comédiens, j'ai toujours les sensations d'un amateur, quoi.
So I'm not surprised that a lot of people like his work, and I'm pretty sure it's one of those styles that you have to either love or hate. I love most of his films because I really connect to his movies. There are so many different scenes and characters which remind me of weird things I used to do with my friends when I was in high school.
Je suis sûr que tu sues dans tes gros poils.
Non.
Non, tu sues pas? Et là, tu sues pas, là?
Non plus.
Je suis sûr que t'as des poils partout, toi. T'as le dos velu, hein? Vas-y, dis-le que t'es plein de poils.
Ouais.
Tu vois, j'en étais sûr. Tu me dégoûtes, espèce de sale porc rétrograde.
And these are exactly what his films are about. They're about meta-narratives, they're about the weird, they're about the mundane, and how we can disrupt all of that by just changing one simple thing about a specific person's life. And of course, they are incredibly funny, and they tend to be really well shot for an incredibly low budget as well.
Là, chez l'épicier, je sais pas pourquoi, j'ai eu envie subitement d'acheter des chips. Alors j'ai acheté un sachet, et puis comme je trouvais pas d'insecticide contre les cafards, j'ai pris un truc contre les moustiques, voilà. Hein. Ça m'a coûté 10 balles environ.
Mais là, vous rentrez directement chez vous ou bien vous traînez dans la rue?
Non, je suis rentré. Je suis pas du style à traîner dans la rue, et en plus, il fallait que j'aille m'occuper du cafard.
Most of his films actually look the same when it comes to the cinematography, when it comes to the types of characters that he's interested in, but it doesn't mean that he makes the same film every single time. Like you could say about someone like Woody Allen, for example. No, every single movie that he makes is really weird and different in a new and exciting way. There are almost two different camps of Quentin Dupieux's films. There are the films where he tries to create a completely new universe with different characters and secondary characters with a lot of different rules, and it's kind of like a weird dystopian almost journey for the main characters themselves. And then we have the smaller movies with really low stakes, which just rely on a very simple concept and a very easy idea, and it's just incredibly funny and you just have a good time.
Quand on descend dans ce conduit, madame, monsieur, écoutez bien parce que c'est vraiment quelque chose.
Bah dites-nous quoi, merde.
Quand on descend dans ce conduit, vous n'allez pas me croire, et pourtant c'est la vérité.
C'est juste dingue.
The thing that I love about Quentin Dupieux's films is that you're never bored. That's mostly because he's really good at pacing films. Everything about his scripts is incredibly tight when it comes to the dialogues, when it comes to when he needs to stop to repeat a certain joke, or where a movie needs to end. There is a weird tendency with movies these days, especially American movies. They're just too long. Even horror movies nowadays, they're almost always more than 90 minutes, and it's so incredibly weird because often they don't even have enough things to talk about with that specific a lot of time. And that's one thing that I love about every single one of his films. They're really short, very often they're like 70 minutes, 80 minutes, maybe 90 minutes at very maximum length, and they are to be enjoyed almost as episodes in a TV series, because it feels like sometimes it's part of the same universe, because he reuses certain actors, he almost reuses certain characters as well, and it's kind of fascinating, but it's always in a non-pretentious way.
Est-ce que la caméra tourne encore?
parce que je suis obligé de réaliser ma propre interview. Ok. That was French.
What did he do?
Ouais.
Il a fait quoi?
Il a regardé, il a contrôlé. You understood my French.
This is something that I love about Quentin Dupieux. He seems to be a filmmaker of the people. He seems to make movies because he loves making them. He seems to disrupt certain genre conventions because he thinks it's funny, and mostly because why not? That's something that has been theorized quite a lot when it comes to Dupieux's filmography. He's the master of the why not. Every single time you watch one of his films, you will ask yourself, why is everything happening in the way that it's happening? It's so incredibly weird. Why is no one actually properly communicating things to each other? And the answer is almost always why not? And that's really beautiful. Plays so perfectly with that wonder that we all have about filmmaking, about the process of creating something new, about the process of commenting on genre conventions, commenting on films that have already been made, but doing it just because it's fun, not kind of doing it like Quentin Tarantino does, where he consciously recontextualizes things from our past, and specifically things from a forgotten American pop culture, so that they can become relevant again. While Quentin Dupieux is kind of like the reverse of that, where even when he's referencing things, when he's copying things from other movies, he's doing it just because it's fun. At the end of the day, the film still ends up being quite thought-provoking, but not because he's trying, just because the movie is so well made that it's kind of impossible not to apply some kind of weird film theory on it.
Bon, alors raconte.
But anyways, let's stop with this incredibly huge introduction and actually go into my ranking of all of his films, because I've seen all of them, including his very first film, which is called Non-Film. And we're gonna start with that because it's the very bottom of my list. This film is about a young actor who suddenly wakes up in the middle of the shooting of a movie that he doesn't understand at all.
Quelqu'un veut du café?
And I wanted to talk about this movie, specifically talking about the craft of filmmaking. And I wanted to tell you like some anecdotes from what I went through when I went to film school, because this is why I enjoyed this film so much, even though it's probably one of his most hated, because it's one of his most provocative as well when it comes to the form itself. You can tell already by the title, because it's called a non-film. So Quentin Dupieux actually wanted to make a non-film, a film that doesn't look like a film that doesn't want to entertain, a film that doesn't want to exist, and at the end of the day, a film that maybe doesn't even deserve your time because it's so boring, right? And I can really relate to the idea of making a short film with a strong concept, and a concept that is so strong that it really doesn't matter that you film it through a shoe while recording a sound with a broom, just because the power of cinema is strong enough to make you relate and understand the story no matter what. And this is exactly what happens with the film Non-Film. Of course, it is a film that is all about form and not really about story. You end up kind of theorizing a lot when it comes to this film here, but it's definitely incredibly badly shot, for example, because as I said before, it's a movie that doesn't want to behave like a movie.
My favorite thing about the movie is like it feels like a movie. It feels like a real, like, you know, go to the theater film movie that, you know, you kind of, the reason why you go to watch something on the big screen. I think
So it's kind of shot with a weird handheld camera, and it tries sometimes to place the main characters within the frame, but it can't, because this is not a traditional conventional movie, and we're not supposed to perceive it as a movie, so we're not supposed to understand it as a movie as well. I mean, the film structure is really fascinating, mostly because it never spends time to self-congratulate itself because of how clever it is, which is probably the mistake that most young filmmakers would do with their own first films, especially if they have a strong concept like this one here. And that's probably one of the only reasons why this film is actually still watchable today, because there are so many interesting things to say about it. Also, I'm gonna be pretentious here and say that Jean-Luc Godard would have probably loved Dupieux's work. I'm 100% sure of it. Also, when I read a couple of reviews online with this film here, I noticed that a lot of people were highly criticizing the found footage aspect of it, but he didn't invent anything. In the 90s, there were a group of mostly Danish filmmakers called the Dogma 95 filmmaking group, and they were challenging completely the conventional ways of making films. And one of them was you couldn't really shoot it to look perfect, and you had to use basically handheld cameras. You had to use natural lighting and stuff like that. And we ended up with movies that looked kind of ugly, but they looked really real just because of it. So people who didn't like this movie because they didn't like understand the found footage aspect of it, you should really reconsider it and watch other films within that specific genre, because then you will understand it a lot more. And having said that, I still gave 2 stars over 5 to Non-Film because it's a flawed movie at the end of the day. Even though you can see the genius of Dupieux's work and style and what he will do in the next film, it's still a flawed movie that is not that funny. And I love Dupieux's work mostly because it's so incredibly funny.
Est-ce qu'il y aura un film?
The next movie in my list is gonna be Steak, and I gave it a 3.5 over 5 stars review on Letterboxd. And it's basically about George, who is the scapegoat of his classmates. One day he just cracks and shoots them, and his best friend Blas is accused in his place and sentenced to 7 years in a psychiatric hospital. At the day of his release, Blas realizes he only has one family friend, his best friend George, but he does not want to hear about childhood friend as he tries to integrate with the Shivers, a gang whose members wear red jackets and boots, drink milk, drive sport trucks, and play an incomprehensible and violent game that mixes cricket and mental arithmetic. This is one of those movies that really remind me of the things I was talking about before when it comes to Dupieux being almost like the opposite sides of the coin where Quentin Tarantino is. Mostly because I think that while Tarantino glorifies American pop culture, Dupieux gives it like a French look, a French interpretation, and myth busts almost everything about it.
Tu devrais partir. Tu devrais partir très très loin dans un pays très lointain, sous-développé. Un pays où un pauvre type comme toi, eh ben ça deviendrait cette fois un king.
It makes American cliches actually look ridiculous and laughable. Steak is so many things. It's a parody of teen movies and everything that comes with them. The over-the-top nonsensical bullying, the social cliques, the casting of clearly 30-year-olds to play teens, the drinking/partying culture, that sense of never wanting to grow up, or even the desensitization to violence, which we can see in other things like A Clockwork Orange. And I'm pretty sure that just by the fact that the gang members drink milk and spend most of the time drinking milk, it's definitely a wink wink to A Clockwork Orange, which was incredibly funny because once again it's not treated as something cool, it's treated as something ridiculous. And across the entire film they keep kind of increasing the volume and the size of the jugs that they use to drink milk out of, just pushing and pushing this into more ridiculous places until it's not funny anymore. It's just so weird. When it comes to Steak, it's not definitely Dupieux's funniest script, but we still get that kind of cigarette burn cinematography that will become his most famous kind of aspect when it comes to the next few films that he will be making, but it's still incredibly fun to watch. Next, I put his film Rubber, which is kind of a cult classic nowadays. It's a bit of a weird, funny take on the B-horror slasher movies, and the main character is an actual rubber tire who goes around using kind of like psychokinetic powers, killing people. This is Dupieux's first English language movie, and it's probably one of the most easily recognized by everyone, whether you are a French audience or like an American audience, mostly because he's clearly clearly parodying things that we've seen over and over again. And here he also starts to kind of like comment on hypocrisy. He's really into that kind of stuff and showing the commodification of movie violence. For example, there is a whole meta-narrative in this film where we see an audience who is actually standing around in the middle of the desert, kind of like looking at the action, thinking of it as a movie, kind of like a meta movie. But at the end of the day, they end up participating in it as well, and they become the main characters of the story. So it's really weird because of that. And he kind of comments on the idea of how we can be so incredibly absorbed by the fictional narratives that surround us to the point that we can literally die. And I find that incredibly funny.
Door just opened.
Come on, be a good boy. Blow my head off.
Again.
Come on, closer.
Of course, here he starts commenting on police violence and just on how bad police work can be, to the point that it's just risking everyone's lives, and it ends up being incredibly funny. He does that even more in his movie Wrong Cops, which I will talk about later on. But just because there are so many things that Dupieux needed to set up for this movie to work and make sense, it actually starts around the 40-minute mark. That's when it starts becoming really interesting and really funny, because we understand where all the pieces of the puzzle kind of perfectly fit. But it's a bit too late, because as I said before, Dupieux makes really short films, so by the 40-minute mark it's too late to actually commit to a movie like this. And that's why I gave it a 3.5 over 5 stars on Letterboxd. The next movie in my ranking is Au Poste, and in English I think it's called Keep an Eye Out. And of course it's a very funny wink to something that happens in the film itself, which is not that clear when you hear the French title, which just means up and ready.
C'est la nouvelle comédie de Quentin Dupieux.
C'est qui?
Je sais pas.
C'est le réalisateur, j'imagine?
Je pense.
Ça parle de quoi?
C'est un flic qui interroge un suspect toute une nuit et ça va mal tourner.
Il y a un meurtre?
Ouais.
Le titre du film?
Au Poste.
And remember when I was talking about the two different categories of Dupieux's work? This one definitely falls in the second category of low stakes movies, mostly because we're stuck in a police station hearing a very boring interrogation where basically the lines between past and present begin to blur. There are so many different flashbacks and kind of meta narratives where people start commenting on each other's memories and almost like invading them à la Inception.
Vous n'aviez pas encore le trou dans le poumon à l'époque apparemment.
Oui, non. Mais comment vous savez ça?
Bah on voit bien, vous êtes torse nu et il n'y a pas de trou dans la poitrine, c'est pour ça.
Attendez, vous êtes en train de me dire que vous voyez pendant que je raconte?
Ah oui, je vois les images, oui. Puis hyper bien. Hein.
And this film is also really interesting, mostly because it's a parody of those procedurals and police investigation movies of the 70s and the 80s that were really popular in France. And also it's a huge critique of the bureaucratic system here in France, especially when it comes to police work and how incredibly weird and obscene it can be, especially when we're addressing murder investigations and really important things. There is actually a movie called Police, which is a movie about sexual offenders and pedophiles, and that movie shows it quite well, where you have incredibly powerful emotional moments of interrogation with these criminals, and then you have moments where policemen have to sit down and just write a report, and they just spend so much time doing that it feels almost so incredibly weird, the juxtaposition of both things. And it's the same thing when it comes to this movie here.
Hop, 16h20, hop, 3h du mat, hop, 11h10, hop, ta gueule.
And in this movie, of course, there is yet another layer of meta-narrative fun to it because of the plot twist that we get at the very end, which makes no sense at all when you think about it. And that's exactly why it works so well. And I also love those films that kind of like focus on small environments, but they don't really make you feel constricted within them. They open up so well just because of these two people telling each other stories. Those are like tend to be the smartest scripts when you think about it. If you can make a movie like this and not make it boring and uneventful. And the interesting things about this film is often the idea of making up stories, forgetting certain details, and how incredibly useless others might be, and how the human brain just really focuses on that kind of stuff at the end of the day. The next one is gonna be Incredible but True, which in French it's called Incroyable mais vrai.
J'ai plutôt envie de vous faire découvrir ce qui est à mon sens le clou de la visite. Ce conduit peut radicalement changer votre vie.
I actually have a full review of this film that I made a couple of months ago, and it came out actually around the Cannes Festival because he released 2 films this year. And now that I think about it, in the middle of this video, I'm starting to wonder whether I will have seen Fumé fait tousser and whether I will be adding it to this ranking or not. Because it says that it's coming out today, but I don't know, sometimes, you know, you have premieres, and I'd like to go to one of those so that I would be able to include my critique of that movie as well to this video. But I still don't know whether it's gonna happen. Let's keep the tension going. Maybe it's gonna happen, maybe not. We'll see by the end of this video.
Voilà les nouvelles, hein.
Incroyable.
Bah, sincèrement, c'est mieux de pas le dire, je pense.
Incredible but True belongs once again to the category I was talking about before. Low stakes movie with a really strong concept, a couple of actors, a house, and that's basically it. Weird conversations between the main characters and a couple of absurd things going on, but nothing too weird at the end of the day. I really enjoyed it, mostly because it's almost impossible not to enjoy Quentin Dupieux's films because they're so well crafted at the end of the day. And this movie is basically about Alain and Marie who moved to the suburb house of their dreams, but the real estate agent warned them what is in the basement may well change their life forever, and he actually does, and it's really funny once you find out what it actually is hidden in the basement. Really good performance by Alain Chabat, but there is actually another performance by him in another Quentin Dupieux film, and I want to leave it to that because he's much better in that other film. But at the end of the day, there's not that much I can say about Incredible but True, just because it's a very simple concept. I really enjoyed it. I was actually the premiere and I got to meet Quentin Dupieux himself.
Oh! Can you feel the beat?
He takes off all of his clothes down to his underwear.
Can you feel it? In your organs. Africa!
The next one is gonna be Wrong Cops, which I gave a 4-star review over 5. And I talked about this movie before. This movie is literally about policemen being incredibly bad at their job, and it's so incredibly funny. This might be the worst policeman you've ever seen. It's yet another movie that he made in English, and I'm actually impressed by how fluent all of his movies are, whether it's written in English, whether it's written in French, whether it comes to the dialogues or whether it comes to the performances themselves. There is no change at all, and I find that incredibly fascinating, and I can't think of another director who actually does that besides maybe people like Paul Verhoeven, even though he ended up making so many English films and not that many Dutch films at the end of the day.
Come back here! I shot him by mistake. What are you listening to?
Something cool.
Oh, yeah!
It's really funny because my review of this movie is literally just 1 sentence because there was nothing else to add, because it's a very straightforward story, but it just works so well. And basically I said something along the line of, I fucking love Quentin Dupieux. I'm pretty sure we would have been great friends in high school.
Tell me what you gonna do. I've been thinking about you. Wake up in the morning.
That's all you need to know about Wrong Cops and whether you will enjoy it or not. The next one in my list is going to be Mandibule, which is a film that came out a couple of years ago. Funny enough, this is the film with which I discovered Quentin Dupieux because I had no idea who he was. I knew of Rubber and I kept it at the back of my mind for so long and I never saw it. But once I saw Mandibule, I just rediscovered, like, you know, genius. I was like, who is this director? Who is this director who reminds me of the Coen brothers without being as pretentious?
Ce soir, j'ai préparé des paupiètes de dinde.
Elle a eu un choc au cerveau après un accident de ski. Depuis, elle parle comme ça, quoi.
Bon appétit à tous!
And of course, Mandibule also stars some of my favorite actors or comedians ever, who used to do like some comedy sketches called Very Bad Blague that I used to love when I was in high school, so I was really looking forward to this movie.
Mais vous n'êtes pas Batman et Robin?
Non, si, on est des super-héros, quoi.
On a des super zizi.
Oh ben non, mais Gaspard, dis pas nos super-pouvoirs.
Chut, je suis Robin, promis.
Oh, je m'envole, super demi-molle.
And everyone is so incredibly good in it. Adele is so fucking funny in this film here. Really unforgettable concept as well, starring a huge fly. And I'm really glad that the fly is not CGI. If this movie was made in the States by a weird indie director, I'm pretty sure they would have made it CGI. But no, it's an actual thing that you can feel and touch. It looks really weird. It looks kind of disgusting. It reminded me of, well, David Cronenberg's The Fly. But not in a creepy way, it's just really well handled when it comes to the practical effects. We have a simple concept, they have to drive from A to B, but these main characters are so incredibly stupid that it's gonna lead them through like a rabbit hole of weird things happening to them. It's such a weird journey, and the fly is not even the weirdest thing happening in this film. I don't even remember the last time I was loudly laughing so much at a film in the theater. Yeah, I know. Dolph Springer wakes up one morning to realize he has lost the love of his life, his dog, Paul. And during his quest to get Paul and his life back, Dolph radically changes the lives of others, risking his sanity all the while. This movie is called Wrong, and it's so fucking funny.
What I'm about to show you is highly interesting. We've accessed Paul's Turd's memory. Wow. Those are its subconscious video signals. Incredible. Pay attention to what happens next. It all happens very fast. Why?
I feel like this belongs more to the first category I was talking about before, where we stop a weird dystopian universe that we would never want to live in because it's so incredibly weird. I feel like this movie is more of like a critique of the B kind of mentality. So people going to offices and working for really long time, not exactly knowing what they're doing, not exactly knowing why they're doing what they're doing, but they keep doing it just because it's what people do, right? You wake up, you leave your home, you go somewhere to work, and then you go back home, and then you rinse and repeat, and you do that for the rest of your life. And this is what this movie is basically about. And that's kind of like a sub-theme, because at the end of the day, this is also about human connections with animals and the opportunity of mentally connecting with your dog and creating like a stronger connection. Really weird concept. I don't want to spoil it that much because there are a lot of weird plot twists within this movie here. There is another actor who we've seen in Steak already, and he was one of the cops in Wrong Cops, the movie I was talking about before. And he's just so incredibly funny this time around. I didn't find him that funny in the movie Steak because I felt like he was really playing on the cliche of the kind of like the dumb simpleton character, while here he actually has something to do. There are so many quid pro quos, and that's something that Dupieux really likes, the weird coincidences of life that lead you into something weird or that lead you into something incredibly dramatic. Like this movie here starts with a random firefighter taking a shit in the middle of the road while there is a fire in the background. Just to tell you, Quentin Dupieux, what can you say? What can you add? There's nothing to add.
Parler de mon blouson.
Pourquoi on parlerait de ton blouson?
Vous voyez bien que c'est pas un vêtement banal.
Now I'm gonna talk about one of my favorite movies almost ever, mostly because in this movie here Dupieux is kind of like talking and critiquing and commenting and playing with the conventions of the slasher genre, and this movie is starring Jean Dujardin, who you might know because he was in The Artist and other French movies. Oh! Really good actor, and he's really good in this film here. I'm talking about Le Dain, which is about a serial killer who is obsessed about wearing outfits which are made of animal skin, specifically deer skin, and he's trying to create the perfect outfit, and he will do anything to be able to achieve that. It's so weird, it's so funny, it's also really gory. Some of like Dupieux's films tends to be quite violent or gory. There are people who die, but at the end of the day it doesn't really feel like torture. It just feels like they happen to die because of one reason or another. It feels very uneventful, but you still feel the gravitas of the violence itself, you know? So it kind of feels like a horror film, but at the same time it's not really following the amount of joy that you get from slasher movies when the villain kills someone. You're just sitting there being like, why did you kill that person? There was no need to do it. It's just a weird thing that he does. It's almost like a quirk. This guy's personality trait is that he kills people when he feels like it, and it's funny. It reminded me of another movie Ryan Reynolds called The Voices, which you might enjoy as well if you like Le Dain.
Jerry, you're a serial killer.
No, he isn't.
Now we're gonna talk about my favorite Dupieux film ever, which is called Reality, or in French, Réalité. Alain Chabat is in it. It's once again a weird meta-narrative thing about screenwriting and about telling stories. And this is the really incredible performance that I was talking about before. Alain Chabat is so good in this film here. He's so good at being serious and being unintentionally funny. That's what he's good at, and he does that perfectly in this film here. And it's basically about a wannabe director who's given 48 hours by a producer to find the best groan of pain worthy of an Oscar as the only condition to back his film. So he basically asks him to groan, yeah. Like, I'm trying to explain that with other words, but that was perfect. Like, there is no other way to explain it. It's so weird.
Subitement, les postes de télévision deviennent très méchants. Partout sur Terre. Ouais. C'est-à-dire que les télés envoient des ondes très puissantes qui font cramer les gens de l'intérieur. Ah, c'est bien, ça j'adore. Les gens souffrent. Ils souffrent à fond.
And of course it's addressing all the different weird things that go on filmmaking sets, specifically maybe in Hollywood, since he's worked in the States as well. Maybe he's seen a lot of weird things going on movie sets that he hasn't seen in France, and he's trying to comment on that. But once again, he doesn't do it because he wants to point at and blame, and he wants to create a change within the filmmaking industry. No, he's doing that because it's funny, because he creates jokes, because he creates incredibly weird scenarios for our main characters, and because at the end of the day, why not? Am I right?
Tu crois que Kubrick s'enregistrait des heures comme ça, comme un con?
Eh, Kubrick mes couilles.
This was a retrospective on Quentin Dupieux's filmography. I really enjoyed watching his films, especially because it doesn't really feel like you're watching a film. It just goes so smoothly. Even like the worst films on his filmography, you're never really bored, and it's almost always guaranteed that you will see something weird and interesting in one of his films, and memorable as well. And that's why I really recommend his entire filmography. Now here, I will either put the review of Fumer fait tousser, if I managed to see it at the premiere, and if I didn't manage to get the tickets of the premiere, then this is the end of the video, I guess. And this was just a weird meta-narrative thing that I did. See what I did there? Is it funny? Oh, you're still there? Oh, sorry, I forgot to cut. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments what you think of Quentin Dupieux's filmography, whether you are an American audience, English audience, international audience, or French audience. Woo, woo, represent. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to the fly from the movie Mandibule, because she really deserves all of your love. Because if you try to imagine that film from the fly's perspective, it must be so fucking weird. Like two guys just walking you around like you were a pet. Weird. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart. I'm back. Yes, I know you were not expecting this, but I'm here. And yeah, I ended up seeing Smoking Causes Coughing, so here I am giving you my advice and putting it into the official ranking of the video you just saw before. So basically, I actually really enjoyed it. The director himself was there at the premiere, and we had a little Q&A at the end. It was really fun. There were a lot of actors as well. I got to meet one of my favorite actors ever from the Palma show. The other one, not Grégoire, but David. And you probably know how much I love them, because I said it like at the beginning of this video. But anyways, I don't want to repeat myself. I'm here because, first of all, one thing that I realized that I love a lot when it comes to Quentin Dupieux's films, it's the fact that the marketing is just absolutely brilliant.
Non, Aura au secours. Non. Ah,
Voilà. J'ai trouvé la seule bande-annonce valable à regarder. Je vous la montre.
For example, I had no idea what Fumé Fetuse was about, and it's nice to have a surprise. I feel like these days we don't really have nice surprises when it comes to films anymore. You just go there, you know exactly what you're gonna get, and you end up not being disappointed, or sometimes just being a tiny bit satisfied, but that's nothing more, you know? When it comes to Quentin Dupieux's films, especially the 2 ones that came out this year, you have no idea what to expect, and that's the most fun part about his films as well. You're always surprised. Of course, I don't want to give you any spoilers when it comes to this film here, but once you start seeing the structure of the film, you sort of know what to expect. And this is also the problem of making a film where people are sharing stories, a la Creepshow, because he said in the Q&A that it was one of the biggest influences when it comes to this film here, including other stuff like, of course, the Power Rangers movies, TV shows, and things like Charlie's Angels, and things like James Bond, of course. A lot of different references which were incredibly fun.
The call is not due for 10 seconds yet. You can count on Charlie to be punctual at all times. He will call right now.
But at the end of the day, once they start telling stories, you know that this film is going to be about them interrupting the A plot, so interrupting the main story, to tell B, C, D, E other kind of plots. And of course it's fun because Quentin Dupieux is always good at telling those kind of incredibly weird stories. Plus the special effects in this film are incredible. The cinema was roaring, everybody was incredibly excited to be there, and it was so much fun, and I was laughing out loud for the entire film. But at the end of the day, I found it a bit predictable. Having said that, I still think it's one of his best films, and I put it, I think, in number 3, mostly because this belongs to the category of shaping up universes instead of basing a movie in just one house, for example. We've got so many different references to so many different things, and the characters are actually very interesting, and it really looks like they have their own inner lives, and we just get a really short glimpse of that throughout the film. I also really enjoyed the fact that this film is actively addressing the fact that those kind of weird Power Ranger movies tended to be very sexist when it comes to the way they used to portray women, use women as side characters basically, and also the fact that at the end of the day it was always the guys who were actually the main characters making the active choices in the story itself. So I loved that about this film here. And of course, it's Quentin Dupieux. So there is a lot of absurd comedy going on, and it's incredibly funny. It actually reminded me of a lot of like 60s science fiction movies. That was when retrofuturism was really on vogue. So you see a lot of like incredibly weird screens and glowing buttons a bit everywhere. And it's just really funny. I feel like we should have a comeback for retrofuturism, because retrofuturism is incredibly interesting. If you like retrofuturism, you should really check out, for example, the series Maniac starring Jonah Hill. That one was really good. I don't know, there is this kind of charm when it comes to retrofuturism that we don't really have when it comes to dystopian futurism or cyberpunk futurism, and I really hope it makes a comeback. Anyways, this is my official ranking for all of Quentin Dupieux's films. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really recommend, of course, Fumé Fetuse. It's definitely one of his best films, and you'll have a good time. Plus, it's short, like all of his films. So even if you don't enjoy it, it's in and out as fast as possible. Something that I really enjoyed with the Q&A is that so many people asked him questions like, why did you decide to end the film in that specific way? And he was saying that he hates that question so much because you could ask that about any of his films. For example, why is Jean Dujardin obsessed about deerskin? Or why is there a fly in Mondibule when all the other animals seems to be the good size? When you start asking those questions, like, you don't really pay attention to the plot itself, you're just asking questions that don't need to be answered. And of course, his answer is always why not, because it's fun, so why not? I think I've already done my conclusion, so I don't think I need to say goodbye or tell you to subscribe or whatever, because Patrick from the past has already done it. So bye, I guess. Keep watching films. Plus, I really like the idea that, oh wow, that really hurt.
temps, c'est écœurant, hein, tous ces films. Non, on se demande pourquoi on en fait d'autres, en fait. Non, il y a assez de films, en fait. Ça sert à rien, quoi. On n'est pas loin d'avoir tout fait, quoi. Hein. Pourquoi s'emmerder à faire des films?
Est-ce qu'il y aurait un film?